Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Marcela Widrig. So Marcela has been in the embodiment world for over 20 years. She's trained in Grinberg Method, all sorts of other hands-on work. She's working with trauma, helping people release old stories through the body. Got a very rich background, all kinds of things, actually. I'm sure we'll get into it. So welcome.
Thank you. So I was living in Barcelona about a little over 25 years ago, and one of my dearest friends at the time was studying this bodywork, and she needed guinea pigs. And I started to show up, and then it got to the point where the work was getting a bit more intimate, so it's better to go to somebody that's not a friend. And I found myself showing up every week, and I had chronic migraines, I had chronic digestive disorders, I was unhappy, I guess, really. And the more that I got into this work as a client, the more curious I was. And I would say that the main thing that I discovered was suddenly these aspects that I had always deemed just part of my personality that I was going to have to kind of rein in and control and manage, that I started to learn how to undo them and not be trapped by them. And this to me was a revelation. And, today that seems like really common conversation for people, but it wasn't 25 years ago at all. And so I started to study the work.
So you, as I understand it, you grew up in the US, is that right? But then this was in Spain.
Yeah, I grew up in the US and then lived in Europe off and on for a number of years.
Okay, and the Grinberg Method is not well known in the UK, but I've come across it because I have two very close Israeli friends who are trainers in this method. So one of them is actually coming on the show at a later episode, but as the first person on that's trained in this methodology, and I know you've moved on from there, maybe though you could tell us all what the Grinberg Method is, because I still haven't quite figured out what it involves.
Well, I would say that it's really just approaching life subjects, life traumas, life challenges through the body, and looking at the way that we repeat ourselves over and over and over in the body, and how to undo those repetitions. So as opposed to working just through the mind, it's actually looking at, if you have a certain belief, how do you shape yourself around that belief? If you have an impulse in your emotions, how do you shape yourself around that repetition? And if you undo the shape, then whatever experience that got stuck in place and you keep going back to and back to and back to, that can actually complete itself. So in the context of a trauma, if somehow you learned very early on that you weren't supposed to show that you were afraid, and the way that you learned how to do that was to grip your stomach and shorten your breath a little bit and gaze down, it can be that scenarios in life today as an adult trigger a similar feeling of fear, but you somehow know from your past that it's dangerous to show that you're afraid. And so you go into the exact same mechanism, which could mean that you shy away from things that you really want in life. It could mean that you shy away from going out to meet people that you want to meet, or trying a new profession, or going on an adventure that you've longed for in your life. So the Grinberg Method kind of, I would say, gave me the real base for this kind of approach to life. And then over the years, I've started to focus more in depth on certain aspects of humans that we didn't focus on in the Grinberg Method. And those are more the aspects of shame, which is a big subject of what I teach, and how we hold that in the body. So one aspect of the work, though, is through the body touch, just working through touch to bring people's awareness up, to feel how they create these patterns. And another aspect is through just embodiment practices and exercises and movement. So it's those three areas that are all put together.
Great. So let's kind of take this. I want to cover all the things you've said in more detail. And it gives us enough for an hour right there, doesn't it, really? I mean, the first of all, the sort of basic, we might say like body therapy or embodiment assumption that our old patterns of being get caught, as it were, in the body as contractions, and then we can work with body work in a kind of hands-on way to work with those patterns to reveal them and shift them. And then also I've seen some nice videos of you working with movement and kind of free movement, kind of dance type practices. And typically, just to focus first on the Grinberg method, what's typically done in that? Is it some hands-on body work? Is it kind of more like talking and getting people to feel the body? Like, give me some sense of what that might look like.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that quite honestly, I don't consider myself a Grinberg Method practitioner anymore. So I can say that was a good, solid 18 years of training. But in separating from it, and actually disaffiliating from it for ethical reasons, I found a different approach, and it utilizes the tools, like the basic tools, sort of like the hammer and the nails type of thing. But when a client comes, sometimes they'll have a subject, like a life subject. Sometimes they'll have a physical condition that they're dealing with. And sometimes there's just this gnawing, I don't know, but I know that something's not happening in my life the way that I want it to happen. So usually in the first 5 or 10 minutes of a bodywork session, we'll have a chat, really looking at, okay, so what's going on? And my aim in those moments is to see, where is this person's attention trapped? Where is it just stuck and not moving in their life? Mm-hmm. And then in the conversation, inevitably, their body shows both of us, myself and the client, where to work, where to go. If you start to talk to me about some sort of love that left you long ago, and somehow there's a wound that's still there, in the talking about it, your body's going to reveal how you're holding it and what got trapped there. And it's going to, and so after that sort of defined in the first part of the conversation, and it's not like it's a mystery. I'm very clear about saying, notice what's happening in the body and notice the feeling that you have, and is recognizing it as something that is repetitive in their lives. And then I'll start the work on the body, which could be, just in the area of the chest. It could be just in the mid-back area. But what I'm trying to do in those bodywork sessions is to draw attention to the repetition that their body of the shape, and then start to open it up. But it's very interactive. It's not like the client doesn't just lie on the table and say, fix me. It's very much like drawing attention, having a conversation, listening to what's happening. Sometimes people need to talk their way through. Sometimes talking is a deterrent from actually experiencing what's happening. So I look at things, I work a lot with the deeper, almost denied emotions that we have. And a lot of people call it, you work with the shadow, and I don't really tend to describe it like that. I don't think it's important to describe it like that. I work with, as I said before, shame, rage, hate, deep loss, grief, things that we all have. We just have differing access to it. Mm-hmm. And I don't look at it as good or bad. I just look at it as, like back when you lost your grandfather, who was a very dear, safe place for you to spend time, and it wasn't allowed for you to actually feel what the loss did to you. So there's these scars that are, protections that are put over the heart. So something got stuck there. Some sort of energy got stuck back in that moment. We want to bring that back. And the way it happens beautifully in the body, because it happens as heat, as sweat, as tingling, as flow, as just a rush of energy that can go up and down and in and out. And
so a number of systems I've come across work with this model of sort of outdated learning, that there's a learned pattern that has become solidified or stuck. And it seems like there's different ways to work with that. Some work with a kind of release model, some with a completion model, like completing a stuck movement, and others with more of just an educational model, like just learning something new. Which of those kind of most resonates with you, or something else?
I would actually say all three. I've never divided it up this way, but depending on the client and their needs, one of them will stand out more than the other. You're always learning, so there's always an educational process of it. There's always some form of release, but it's not just meant to be cathartic, because it's actually meant for your body to absorb and complete something. So yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable just saying, yeah, it's this. It feels very clear to me that it could be.
I'm just offering you those as an entrance point into looking more about the work.
Yeah, it's interesting to perceive it that way, actually.
I hear quite a lot of different kind of body workers and embodiment people talk about different methods, and there's often a sort of implicit model, like, you know, something is stuck and needs to be released, or a pattern was learned and a new pattern needs to be learned, you know, and after a while I start to hear the sort of same kind of models, but they are slightly different when in emphasis in different systems.
Yeah, you know, sometimes, Mark, I work with even just feeling a person's potential. And I know that that's a big and a loaded word, but say you have a potential to be a really warm human being, and yet you compartmentalize that for very specific people. And as a result, you're shutting down an aspect of yourself, a quality that's very genuine. And so that can leave you, or whoever does this, very lonely in certain circumstances. So to learn to actually access parts of your qualities of yourself, that's also something that I'm doing in a session. So I'm not sure where that would fit in, but so it's really, I think that one of the things that I have learned over the years, and this was, I will credit those 18 years of training, is when you look at a person just as a body, and a body that holds a life, and you really eliminating information of muscles and technicality, and because the skin can reveal something, the shape of the body can reveal something, the quality of a bone can the movement that a person makes or doesn't make, when they breathe, when they don't breathe, you know, so it's really a dance that I go into with every client, but it's also given very much of a frame, so that the client's not just walking out going, I have no idea what happened. You know, one of the things I really wish for is that a client has something very tangible that they can take and then apply it in their lives.
So when you say tangible, do you mean like an insight, or do you mean they've got a new skill or something they can practice to develop? What are they walking away with?
It would be an insight or an awareness, but always connected to the body. So it could be, say, that there's a recurring frustration that happens to you with you and your partner. And you know that every time this happens, every time that you walk in the front door and the first thing you're greeted with is a mess, that you tend to tighten your lower back and your lower belly and harden your shoulders and your jaw, and you become a little bit remote and a little bit distant. You don't catch that moment, right? But so let's say that in the session we actually started from that. You had a release of rage that had nothing to do with your current relationship, but the past scenario of somewhere being disrespected. So that every time you walk in the front door today, when you see a recurring situation that just never seems to change, it wakes up that feeling of being disrespected. Now, over time, if that's not dealt with, right, that can lead to a real disintegration of a relationship that could have a lot of love.
Because you're responding disproportionately, right? Like responding
for sure,
rather than actually in the present moment. Like, hey, this isn't actually a big deal. It's only a coffee cup. It's not a huge disrespect, but there's a historical resonance.
Yeah. So if you start to know, okay, these are the circumstances. These are the little situations that are connected to this disproportionate feeling. And in those situations, I know that I grip my lower belly and I immediately feel disrespected. You know, you feel disrespected, which does not mean you are being disrespected. It could, but many times it's not. It's just a habit that somebody's lost their attention. If you know after a session, okay, if I let go of my belly and I breathe deeply, I'll feel a strong rush of energy that goes down to my legs, and I can ask for what I need in that moment.
Yeah, so it's identifying kind of somatic markers of historical patterns and then being able to interrupt those with something new.
Yeah. And you know, small but not small. If you've gripped your lower belly your whole life, for you to be able to catch those moments where you don't.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. You know, I had a tight butt for half my life. Then I invented somewhere in Brazil. I just felt it kind of released, you know, and it was like the first time in my life I'd had a squidgy ass and I was an uptight Englishman, and it's the weirdest feeling. It was, you know.
And then you learn to dance the samba.
Well, that's important to dance. I've seen you do some beautiful dancing on your videos on your site. I was checking out various stuff about you before, and it seems like movement's a part of it. Listen, you mentioned shame and rage a couple of times each. So when I come to those, like, it's like rage I've seen, you know, done in embodied work, sort of old school cathartic work, but I'd love to hear it more. I'm guessing you have a more sophisticated take on it than that. You know, the old school 70s, you know, hit a pillow and get in touch with your rage. And shame, you know, it's been pretty under the carpet until Brené Brown seems to have made shame a celebrity recently, you know? But shame's kind of fashionable now. So as someone that feels lots of rage and very little shame, I'd love to hear more about these two topics.
Well, shame, I would say, is at the crux of a lot of what I'm teaching. And the way that I look at it and the way that I define it is that feeling of lack in ourselves, that feeling that we don't feel that we are enough, sometimes in a general sense, but also repetitively in certain scenarios. And it can be chronic. And so when I'm working with shame, one of the things I'm looking at is the shame of our shame, right? If somebody triggers that feeling of lack or not being enough, or let's say you get criticized and it sort of surprises you, and you thought you were really well prepared and that you'd left everything kind of managed, and then somebody finds a weak spot and bam, your history of shame is woken up. So usually what we do is we'll kind of respond by either becoming capable or perfectionist or hyper apologetic, or, you know, we have the shame of our shame, the way we show the shame of our shame. So when I'm teaching in the workshop, the Shifting Shame workshop, is really just like, first, let's shift our relationship to the concept of shame, and then recognize that it's actually a feeling, if you just embody it, of warmth, of heat. It spreads, it softens our bodies. And what I've found over the years is that as people allow themselves to go into that place that normally they don't touch, that it's like a shared humanity, because it's the physical embodiment of recognizing that we have flaws as human beings. But okay, so we all do. And we all have scenarios where we were treated poorly and we were not recognized, or we were not cared for, or we were somehow made to feel that we didn't matter. If we stop hiding that wound and we just simply relax into it in the moments, again, today, that might trigger it, it does something I've found over the years of teaching that it starts to, it's like building up your earth again. People start to develop a trust in themselves, that, and also allowing for flexibility to make mistakes and to not be perfect and to not know all and to not be good, good at everything, and really just allowing for your own talents and abilities to be there, and a kind of softness in life. So that's one aspect. But the rage, which is also something that I love to teach through, it's not supposed to be cathartic at all. Because if it's just cathartic, then you can burn yourself out. Like rage is fiery. And so if you can tap into the rage and actually start to recognize there's a moment with rage, just like, and if I think of even the deeper rage can be when something that feels almost violent and destructive. So there's a moment when rage is triggered in most of us that we feel, if I let this go, I will destroy things. I will destroy relationships. I will deeply hurt others. I will, nobody will want to be involved with me and I will, that it feels dangerous to express rage.
But rage is dangerous. I mean, that's true.
I would say that
smash someone's head against the wall. You wouldn't argue with that. I don't think you disagree with that.
I don't disagree with that at all. But what I'm suggesting is the energy of rage. What you're talking about is the kind of forceful expression of rage, and I'm not, and I think that that's kind of what happens is that something enrages us and we're very, very quick to kind of squeeze ourselves around it and either work really hard to tap it down, which then can end up as being very depressed and distant from...
psychosomatic. I mean, the repressed anger is what I see in the yoga community, for example, huge amounts of repressed anger, and it comes out in ways. Spiritual bypassing of that comes out in weird ways again, leads to all sorts of weirdness. Or I guess, are you saying that sort of violent behavior is actually a way of not being with rage? It's actually a way of trying to sort of dispel, like, hey, I don't want to feel this, so what I'm going to do is be violent. Or I also see that connection with young men a lot. It's like they don't want to deal with shame, so it comes out as aggression. They get rejected by a girl, and it feels really bad because rejection sucks, and most young women are pretty insensitive to that particular one. And then they don't want to deal with the fact that it sucks, and they're feeling the sort of social shame of, asking the girl out or whatever it is and being rejected. So it then comes out as sort of anger and bad behavior. So is that the kind of stuff you're looking at here? Like not being able to be with those?
Yeah. So if I take that exact example, let's say somebody comes to me as a client for that example, and I see in their bodies that clearly their jaw is incredibly rigid, their shoulders are held, and they've got like a lock around their diaphragm and their ribs. I might work first with their shoulders just to get them to start to be a body on the table. Then I might go to their jaw, and I can work very strongly at times. And in working with their jaw, I'll be ready for whatever's coming. So it could be that there's a really strong wave of rage, which I would look at as maybe being intense flow of heat, sweating profusely, shaking in the body. We may be able to just allow that flow, or the body that's on the table, the person on the table, their mechanism to stop that flow may be what stands out, right? So they may clench down tighter on their jaw, grip even stronger in their diaphragm, and fight the force of this energy. So in a session, what I'm aiming to do is actually, let's go through that block and notice that it's heat, notice that it's strong shaking, allow that in the body, full deep breath, so that in a session they get a different experience of rage. It becomes a physical flow of energy. And it gets back to what I was talking about before, that usually we stop it, right? We stop it at we have an impulse, we feel it, and then we stop it, and then we're acting from that stopped place. And so,
it's fascinating, isn't it, that many of these like unbearable emotions at the level of sensation and, heat, or, maybe years ago, something I really didn't want to, like a sadness I didn't want to feel. And it was really like actually relatively mild physical sensations on some level. But there's a sort of covering it up, or a discharging of it, or a not wanting to go there. And I guess you're supporting people to kind of be present with that rather than act out from that.
Yeah, and I often describe it as riding a wave. There can be, and it's really like riding the waves of sensation. So a lot of when you start to discover the body, and you are your body, and you feel it, and you allow sensations, there's a constant, there's kind of levels of what you start to notice and what you'll feel safe and capable of allowing.
Mm. And there's some gendered and cultural stuff that I've come across in this, like this weird situation where the Western world's got huge abundance and huge wealth, and yet almost the sort of more upper class, middle class people I find, the more they have this sense of sort of unworthiness, or, this sort of, I've seen this a lot in kind of slightly, if I'm being judgmental, slightly sensitive, precious kind of, baby boomer Californians and the like, lots and lots.
Hey, you just described me.
Yeah, well, you're the cat whisperer, obviously. So you're the right person to ask. So, there's a way in which that particular group have been disproportionately representative in embodiment. Like, that particular group are the vast majority of kind of embodiment teachers, and it's actually quite tricky for me to find people from other countries and other generations to have on, the show. Because you guys have done so much good work, but also, massively overrepresented as a result. And in gender, there definitely seems to be a difference in this relationship to shame. And I don't think women, in my experience, are not necessarily having more shame, but it seems like the guys are denying it more, maybe, or hiding it with other things like anger, or, hiding up with something else. And, I'm dealing with a lot of female clients of all ages and cultures who are, in touch with this feeling of not being enough or not being good enough. It's one of, finding it quite difficult in some ways to relate to myself. It does seem on one hand an epidemic across the Western world in a way which is a very sort of first world problem in some ways. But then on the other hand, there are some sort of gendered and cultural factors that I'm seeing in this. So you want to speak to any of that? I'm thinking out loud here, so that wasn't particularly coherent.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, I've been living in Bali, Indonesia, for the last 3.5 years, and, mostly interacting with the expat community, but I do have Indonesian family. And it's not that shame isn't there, but the level of or the life expectation, what we expect from life is very different. So I do somehow think that factors in a great deal. Now, I've been teaching, the workshops I've been teaching have been predominantly to women, and it has been women that I disagree with you on the standpoint of it's kind of a Western world problem.
Yeah.
There is something about being a woman that we can't deny right now, of the generations of reducing ourselves or being reduced. We don't have to go into that because that's a gigantic subject of the movements that are happening, and the Me Too movement, and all of the the pros and cons of that movement.
But shaming men, you mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that it's very reductive to say that, because there's. I'm
slightly playing devil's advocate here, and I want to offer a slightly more conservative and kind of point of view to balance it, but because I think there's lots of great stuff in those movements, of course, and necessary things. But I'm also seeing in many of those kind of movements, a really strong move to shame men. That seems to be a huge part of them.
Yeah, and I have to say it's broken my heart when I see that happening. But here's the take that I have on it, is that just like with a body, right? With a body, when I am touching shame, which can be very much accompanied by rage, there's a point where it can feel kind of out of control. Right. There's a point that when the body starts to open up, that it's messy and it's out of control, and it's that point of the wave where the nature is just taking over. And I see that happening in this movement, right? And I feel like, okay, well, this rage is being unleashed, and we don't know yet how to embody that differently. And even with the shame, like, I know that people quote Brené Brown all the time, and this will probably offend some of your listeners, but I will credit her tremendously with opening up the subject of shame and making it almost like a household conversation, right? But I get so frustrated when I listen to her or read her books, because she does not at all touch the body. And the body is where we hold it.
Yeah.
So we can all sit, we can listen to her and read her books and go, yeah, and identify, but and now what? Now what are you going to do? And with this Me Too movement, this, I think, is part of why it's getting twisted.
Mm-hmm.
Because people don't have this energy is being released. It's being given space. And individually, people don't know how to hold it.
Right. That makes sense.
It has to be learned. So I do sense that we're going through a messy period.
Painful learning.
It is that. But I wanted to address what you're saying about men and the shame of men, because I've been teaching women with the shame in public settings. I've worked with men and women I've worked with over 20 years the whole time. But in the public setting, workshops, I've been teaching women. And that was a distinct choice, because I think that it gives women a lot more freedom when you're working with subjects of shame. But over the years, I'm having more and more men say, when are you going to work with us and teach us, because it's there, we have it. And so I'm working on something right now, but what I can say is that men will definitely become more aggressive when shame gets triggered. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that the aggression goes outward. They can hold it inside, and it can be very, very damaging.
Yeah, I mean, I see a reaction to, a lot of the, healthy evolution of kind of gender narrative at the moment of men either, and I feel this myself, either reacting angrily, or kind of going into kind of self-hatred mode. That's another mode that I see guys go into, Mm-hmm. And neither of those two things, I tend to lean towards the former, but I have plenty of friends that go towards the latter. And again, I think that's that inability to be with like, there's some shame here when I hear, 10 female friends share their stories of being accosted. And I'm like, wow, on behalf of my gender, I'm feeling fucking shame, And I don't like that. And it's very easy to then get defensive as a result. So I'll own that for sure. I think probably. Yeah,
because what I would suggest, what I can offer you is kind of a way of looking at that, since that seems to happen, in the circles that you run in, is that when that gets triggered, what if you relaxed into your lower body, really relaxed your belly, your ass, your legs, your groin, and you allowed for a moment that feels like weakness. It will feel like weakness, because when we become aggressive, we feel stronger temporarily, but we feel stronger, right?
But you're not. You feel it, yeah.
Right. But like, this is the challenge, I think, for men with shame, is that it's as if you're becoming weak.
Yeah, that is very helpful. Thank you. I really like that, because it feels like anger feels strong, even though it isn't. Like Paul Linden, one of my main teachers, does a lot of sort of martial arts experimenting on this and shows people how anger is weak and love is stronger. But it's not. It's countercultural. It's counterintuitive, particularly to guys, I think, to go there. What about Asian cultures? We have quite a lot of listeners, Japan, Singapore, various other places. And I remember the first time I embarrassed a Japanese friend, which in England is a sort of sport people do, embarrass their friends. And I saw this Japanese friend of mine at university when I was studying Aikido. I had various Japanese friends, and he went into shame. And I hadn't seen someone go into this sort, because it's a very public emotion, isn't it? It's a very social emotion, shame. It's about how others see us in that way.
Yeah.
And some of those, Britain has this, I think, more than America, and my family Anglo-Irish. So I see the Irish side, who are a lot less socially concerned, and the British who are slightly concerned what everyone else thinks of them. What will the neighbors say, And then some of my kind of Asian friends or Japanese friends, they have that an extreme kind of sense of sort of social shame, which is quite foreign, I think, to us and to Westerners.
Yeah, I don't have enough experience firsthand. I have been invited to teach in Tokyo and in Singapore, and so that hopefully is going to come up in the future. But one thing I can tell you, I taught a short workshop in Singapore about 3 years ago, and I remember that there was only one Singaporean there. The rest were expats. So that in and of itself kind of showed me that maybe it's going to take a little bit longer. And I distinctly remember this woman had the most beautiful smile, and every time she started to laugh, she would cover her mouth.
Yeah.
Every time. And it was like this tiny representation of exactly what you're talking about, like you're not supposed to stand out.
Yeah, and I do see different cultures respond quite differently to shame. I've lived in sort of 6 or 7 countries. And, you know, in the US, on the one hand, there's confessional culture I often see in the US. And I see that in a lot of embodiment workshops, a very confessional kind of public airing of things. And then there's the Irish side, which is covering up shame with humor while having these kind of Catholic sex shames. And then, you know, the Russian side, I've spent a lot of time there, and the Russians are quite concerned with what other people think of them and how they look. But then there's quite a lot of aggression with that. So I see all these different cultural ways of playing with shame, but it's all there. I guess it's there in all of them. The French often don't want to look good, don't want to look bad. Sorry, there's that sort of social shame of looking less than perfect, because perfectionism touches on this, right?
Yeah, and then if I just take the example of the French, even though I haven't taught many French at this point, my experience from France is like they would then kind of poo-poo the, they would sort of belittle the experience, like, oh yeah, it's not that big of a deal, you know. But if I think about the US, and, you know, I had a really good Israeli friend, in fact, one of my dearest friends, who is a very perceptive person, and she came back and she said, you know, that there's such an undercurrent, a constant undercurrent of humiliation in the US, which is another form of shame. You know, there's this idea of where we're supposed to be as Americans. We're fed it, we're taught it, we're sold it. And so when we don't get there, there's shame.
Oh, I see, because everyone's supposed to have achieved the American dream and been amazing. And because I do see, of all my students, the British students hold themselves back by not wanting to be too big, whereas the Americans feel guilty for not being big. And in a way, the British students are really restricting themselves, and particularly the women, you know, they're really restricting themselves through that sense of who do you think you are? Whereas the Americans are doing the opposite. They're really putting themselves out there, but it's sometimes is driven by a kind of insecurity of I have to be someone. I have to be someone versus I shouldn't.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of, they're very easily, I was going to say they're very easily insulted, if you think about that as Americans, you know, very easily kind of defensive, insulted, and because somehow you've messed with their dignity, their sense of self.
How does shame relate to being offended? Because I feel like we live in the time of being offended. Someone contacted me earlier, very offended by a word I'd used, and I said I didn't really believe in the concept of being offended, and they didn't understand that. Like is shame related? I mean, I guess being offended is kind of, is that related to this?
For sure, yeah. But I'll tell you that I don't really, like, you can get lost in the idea of the concept of being offended or not, but if you just go to the body, you'll find it. You'll find, like, if the person notices, well, where in their body, how did that word land? And because somehow that word landed in a place that for them felt like you were potentially putting them down. And in being put down, there's shame. In feeling put down, there's shame.
Yeah.
So,
and then, though, what I see coming out of that is the attempt, and this is very sort of millennial, is the attempt to control others based on not wanting to feel that bad feeling in the body.
Absolutely. So we have so many rules out there of behavior. And I think that if we just actually relaxed into those moments, right, and realize that we're not going to cease to exist in those moments. We're not going to be humiliated beyond repair in those moments. It's just that we have an accumulation of them. And so that the tiniest thing, it's why, you know, when I get back to the example you used about men getting rejected by a woman, that it hurts. And somehow it also is connected to their dignity.
Yeah, we have these disgusting phenomenon of honor killings. I really hate using the word honor in the sense of in the UK, and a lot of that seems to be, you know, around men not being able to handle any kind of feeling, and it playing out as violence. Yeah,
that's what it'll do. You know, that's what it'll do with in the more extreme cases. And honestly, Mark, when you bring up, you know, this kind of extreme example, like, I look at shame and I think it is a poison in us, undealt with shame. The actual energy of shame, like the if we have to divide it into, good and bad, which I know that a lot of these embodiment worlds do divide emotions into good emotions and bad emotions.
Positive and negative. Yeah.
Yeah, like I cannot. That's a whole other podcast. But what happens is it becomes, let's say, negative or destructive or reductive when we twist ourselves around it. But shame is there to make us more human. That's it. Because it will stop me from trying to humiliate or reduce you as a human being next to me. That's what shame will in actuality keep me aware of. If I'm doing something that is dominating another human being, if I'm aware of shame and it is flowing healthily in my body, it will naturally stop me from doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, isn't there an argument there's sort of a certain amount of shame? I know some people use guilt and shame interchangeably, and other people use them very differently. It's very healthy because it actually teaches us kind of pro-social values. The child kind of gets seen taking a toy off their big brother, little brother, and then the mum looks at them so angrily, and then they feel shame for having taken this toy and hurt their little brother and, made him cry. And there's some sense that kind of shame in a healthy way is how we, one of the ways in which we're learning ethics, like I often use the word regret rather than kind of guilt, for example. Like if I'm thinking back on something that someone might be ashamed of, I'm often thinking, I actually regret that I spoke to someone harshly the other day, and afterwards I reflected on it and I felt this uncomfortable feeling. I guess it's regret, so more than sort of social shame, but it was like, ow. And then I went back to that person and said, you know what, I apologize, I shouldn't have spoken to you like that was too much, but it was that feeling of an unpleasant feeling in my body that alerted me to the fact that I'd been a little bit unpleasant with this person.
Which is really, what you say is so important as adults, because if we do something and we don't take responsibility for it, so say there's guilt, regret, like you did something that harmed another person that would normally lead you to say, I apologize, and for whatever reason you didn't. The accumulation of those moments that you don't, that can actually result in just kind of a pool of shame inside of you, because you didn't move from your values towards another person and take responsibility for whatever happened in the situation. And I see that when I'm with my two nephews in Bali, when they've done something to harm the other by accident, to really teach them that the value of recognizing that was a mistake and it happened and there's an apology, versus them, I already see in their little bodies how they can get a little bit embarrassed, and I would call that like a little thing of shame, because there is something inside of us that knows when we've done something to harm another person. And if we don't take responsibility for it, it just gets stuck in us.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people say embarrassment is the most British emotion. We're like, I'm sorry, terribly sorry. I've just invaded your country. Very embarrassing. Put a flag in it. Very sorry, it's ours now. Slightly embarrassing. Like that. Even the whole British Empire was slightly embarrassingly kind of conquering the world. And like there's something very British about that. So it's interesting to hear that sort of embarrassment is on the spectrum of shame, as it were. And it's
absolutely
social, isn't it? Because guilt or regret, that's my personal business. That's me going, I feel bad, but it wasn't like anyone saw this interaction. So shame is always observed, isn't it? There's always an observer. And this is what, in some ways, personally makes me slightly repulsed by the idea of shame, is that it's always this idea of sort of social judgment is part of shame, though, as opposed to
not only because I was reading a book the other day. It was about it was Trevor Noah's memoir, and he was relating a story where he had been bullied or his bike had been stolen. Yeah, his bike had been stolen. And so his stepfather, he went and told his stepfather, knowing that his stepfather would get angry and actually go and get the child in trouble. Well, the stepfather had tremendous rage issues, went and basically beat this young kid to a pulp. while the young Trevor Noah looked on and didn't act. And I could feel in the story the heaviness of the shame that was there because he didn't act.
Yeah, and I know in a lot of trauma stories, that's really huge, isn't it? The soldier who couldn't save a friend, or the rape victim that couldn't fight off her attacker, that sort of non-action is key to a lot of trauma.
Or the young boy who watched his mother get hit nightly by an alcoholic father and was literally too little to do anything. It does not mean that you don't feel powerless in those moments. And then there's something that you can't even understand that today as an adult, we can frame it more as shame, because those were moments where you didn't act. You couldn't. That doesn't matter though. You know, it still gets kind of just stuck in the body. So this is where I say, like, I go back to those moments where it got stuck. And we try to really unstick the energy so that the person can come, like more of them can come and be present today and in their lives, not burdened by this old story.
Yeah, it makes sense. And what's kind of really bringing you joy at the moment? What are you really, I feel like we've some pretty heavy topics, haven't we, for the last sort of 30, 40 minutes. And that's okay, right? It's good to go there and not avoid it.
We didn't even get to the hurt and the hate that I talk about.
Do some more on that. Dear podcast listeners, episode 2, hate.
Yeah. Look, so what's bringing me joy right now? There's a couple things. I mean, actually, when I teach in these workshops, I marvel every single time to watch the journey that people are willing to go on, and this kind of like the human spirit that just says, I know that I want out of this place, and I'm willing to go there and explore and see what's on the other side. So I think like the courage of humans and this indomitable spirit always just warms my heart in the deepest of ways. But I am working on the elements, air, fire, water, and earth, because I do a lot of movement in the movement workshops that I teach. And one of the things with the movement the way I've been using it in the workshops is actually to move with the stuckness and then wake up the energy. And, you know, like whatever energy the shape, the pattern was built around, through movement, starting to wake that energy up, and then let that guide your body. Let that sort of unfold through movement. So I've been developing that, but one of the things that was missing for me is just going back to the really rich basics of the movement that I teach. So I'm creating this whole program of breaking it down into the elements of air, fire, water, and earth. And it's been really cool. Like, it's just been remarkable to spend a day, for example, just observing the qualities of earth and finding them in the body and starting to use movement to evoke these qualities. Let's say the qualities of basic presence, the qualities of sensuality, of depth, of stability, of perseverance. And so using movement, and it's so simple. It's not something, the body has it. It's there. It's really just a question of how much awareness and depth are we going to allow. So that is definitely one thing that I've been working on lately that's been kind of turning me on. And then the other thing that I have been working that we didn't talk about in relation to the Me Too movement, let's say, and I do teach a workshop called Feminine Power, and it is almost entirely based on the lower body, reconnecting as women to the energies in the lower body. I know there's a lot going on right now in movement about sensuality and sexuality. You know, you see a lot of different, and they're doing good stuff. Like, I really, I love what they're doing.
Get over the shame of sex, and great work, but also...
But yeah, exactly. But it denies it's almost like saying that's what our whole essence is as a woman. Like, and it's not. We have an uncompromising spirit inside of us, that we have an ability in our womb to create and destroy that's different from the ability that a man has to create and destroy. We have the capacity for deep tenderness there, deep sensitivity to changes and to things that are cyclical. We have our rage is held in our lower pelvic area. Our capacity for violence, like the energy to absolutely destroy something because it needs to be, not because we just are in a
That's an archetype of the sort of feminine destroyer that I don't see being acknowledged, and I feel like it's coming out at the moment very publicly. Is this we've made this view of the feminine? It's quite a feminist analysis. We've made this view of the feminine as all sort of sweetness and motherhood and innocent, and maybe the seductress kind of archetype. And I see what's missing is, like, as feminine power grows, many ways a wonderful thing. I don't see the feminine responsibility growing with it. I see that there's a sort of a denial. I think Jordan Peterson talks about this, a denial of the dark side of the feminine, which can be deeply manipulative and destructive and violent, And so I see culture as sort of shifting to seeing men only as their dark side, which exists. I wouldn't shy away from it, but it's also sort of not really acknowledging the terrifying violence of violent potential of women, and the manipulativeness as another subtler form of violence, which can come with the accusations and with the, destroying of people's careers and all the rest of it. And I'm just like, I think we need to acknowledge that archetype.
Yeah, I mean, that's not what I'm doing in this workshop, but in connecting women to their lower body and opening the patterns that are there, that reduces the power of these tendencies to need, to shame, to these tendencies toward bitterness and manipulation. Because if a woman has her really full sense of dignity in the deepest embodied way, there's no need to do that.
And there is, as you say, the sort of lower side of the body where there's real strength, as opposed to that kind of heady manipulativeness or the emotional kind of, victim playing, or kind of, there's this that's another one that's very big, isn't it, at the moment? There's sort of the controlling from the victim position, right? That's another form of kind of feminine power, which is perhaps less healthy than this grounded lower kind of power you're talking about.
Yeah, and if you watch the bodies of a lot of these speakers, which I do, they're not connected to their lower bodies.
Yeah.
Essentially, what's happened is that the rage, which can tend to generate from the lower body, flows very quickly upward, and then there's kind of an enraged expression of it.
Yeah.
And so it's not actually converted into long-lasting depth and power. And this is something that I spend time with in a feminine power workshop, and also in an embodying boundaries workshop that I teach. I'm dedicating a lot of time to just experiencing the expression of the energy without any need to then translate it into some sort of face-to-face confrontation or outbursts or whatever might come about, right? First open it up, become stronger in and of yourself, in your body, and then see where it takes you. I had a client who, after the feminine power workshop in Australia, she had a really strong experience of rage come up when she met with her ex-boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And she quickly got out of the car, and then she went into her backyard, and she said,
No, I was joking. He's not dead now, right?
No, he's not. But she said she danced as wildly as she's ever danced, and it was like a demon took over her body, and then she rode that intense wave, that tsunami, I would say, and then kind of collapsed, and then cried, and then sort of absorbed all of that energy. She came to me with a question, and she said, this was something he used to trigger in me a lot. Was it important for him to see that, or should I have gone back to him and said something? And I just said to her, look, feel what you have in your body now, because you have a kind of clarity of self that you didn't have before that. He's going to feel that no matter what. Mm-hmm. There's no need to go back and say, you need to know what you did to me and you need to know what it causes in me. We as women, and I think this is what you're saying about responsibility, if a strong energy let's call it a strong no, is triggered in me, and I feel it as an incredible wave of heat coming up from my belly, if I find my legs and I find my feet on the ground, so I have my sense of place, and I let that heat absolutely just rush through me, and I absorb it, and I settle, and I breathe. And I'm obviously talking about moments where your life isn't in danger, right? I'm talking about those infractions that we feel on a regular basis. Then I can be like saying no, or let's call it a boundary. It's just very natural. There's nothing, there's nothing.
I mean, in some ways, society I see is kind of like boundary work. Sometimes I do boundary work, and people go from having no, and then they usually swing to a slightly aggressive no, and then they find that sort of powerful, centered, grounded no. And I wonder if all of society, we're talking kind of Western women particularly, aren't developing that. Going from the sort of under boundary to the kind of over boundary, a little aggressive, to the actually that sort of solid, really like genuinely strong, which is strong enough to be kind and strong enough to listen as well.
Yeah. I think that it all gets back to, the tone. You know it in the tone of the voice when the person's speaking, because you can speak incredibly clearly and strongly and have a no that has no tinge of victim in it, right? Mm-hmm. No tinge of complaining. It's just, this is where I stand and this is my experience, and it's just a no or a yes, or like a clear want or not want. But again, like, I do think that we're seeing mistakes, let's say, or tendencies. But I have a lot of I trust that with what's happening in the world with the body and with learning, that I have met enough women along the way who want to be really genuinely strong in their own right, just strong and free and clear, and with all of their creativity and intelligence and sensitivity intact. So, and our body gives us this ability to adapt and to learn and to move and to blend and to push back when we need to push back. And it's constant. It's a constant learning.
I've appreciated this conversation. And one of the things I've noticed is the best conversations I have around what is, fairly tricky subject, we're looking at shame and gender and these kind of things, is with body people. Some of the most, even people I've had quite big disagreements with, a couple of my students disagree with me quite strongly on some of the trans issues. I won't go into details now, but in both cases, we were able to have very respectful, listening conversations. And I hope you've felt that, this conversation has been one of those. And I personally have enjoyed the tone of it. There's some point perhaps disagreement or mutual learning, but there's also like a respect and a groundedness and a ability to self-regulate, kind of when there's conflict, there's always that necessity for self-regulation. And I noticed the best conversations, maybe the only constructive conversations I'm having around these topics, are with other body people. And I think that's not an accident.
No, I don't think it's an accident at all, because it's expansive in that way. If I'm not feeling somehow humiliated by your opinion, and I have a strong, clear sense of self, which is in the body, then I can agree or disagree, but in a way that I don't need to win. It's, and I'll often trust in these kinds of conversations that my perception will expand, and that perception happens in the body. So it's not about winning or losing. It's not about being, right or wrong, shamed or not. It's really like, do you feel it? Is there a disagreement in there? And how do you hold your sense of self and disagree, but it becomes then like the subject, as opposed to being just a back and forth, it becomes something that really just moves out and opens.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. Okay, well, I've enjoyed this. It's just been a different tone than some of the other interviews, but in a way that I've enjoyed. Challenging at times, but mostly very good. I really have enjoyed it. So, Marcela, thank you. 2 things to finish. 2 things. Anything else I would say is also welcome. We're in no mad rush. But 2 things. What's the sort of final message about the body for everyone listening?
Trust it. Go to it every time. When there is something that is pulling your energy and your attention and it feels unresolved, go to the body, sit for a moment, and let yourself really just feel, where am I contracting? Where am I shrinking? What's the main feeling that I have right now? What am I becoming in relation to this person or this subject or this, strongly triggered history? And you can take a moment once you recognize maybe 2, 3 areas in the body where it's held. You can even turn it up a couple notches, like the volume of it. If your jaw's tight, your throat is held, your stomach is squeezed, just turn it up a little bit. Get to know it a little bit more intimately. Yeah. And then
go more before you go less, right?
Exactly. And then you'll find your way out. It could be that your body just, like, maybe put your feet on the ground suddenly, and you might all of a sudden feel, okay, I'm sitting in a chair. So you'll start to add back in the parts of yourself that are very aware that you're here in the present moment and not somewhere in the past or a projected future that is uncomfortable, right? And this is magic to me in the body. It is just magic that something so subtle as paying attention to 3 areas in the body, recognizing what you do and learning to soften it or breathe or relax into it can absolutely shift you from an old story just back into where you are.
Thank you. I share your with the word awe and joy in that process. That's definitely what we share. So people can find you at fierceembodiment.com, right?
Uh-huh.
And you have some SoundCloud resources, I think I found as well, that look pretty good.
I do, and there's a couple more probably coming up soon as I'm doing this exploration of the elements. And I've got an Instagram that I play around with, but the main place is really on my page because I do keep, or my site, because I do keep it updated with dates of my next workshops and where I'm going, and this bodywork sessions, and then also just writings that I do about different subjects where I really do try to find a way to take something personal that I know is universal and then bring it out in some sort of practical form for people.
I'd really encourage people to look at the website. I actually send it to my own website designer saying, look, example of good website, please make website more like this. And the blog there has these little videos on it. Sometimes I feel slightly sad that we do these calls on Zoom, so we get to at least see each other, but the people listening are just hearing voice. And there's some really nice videos on there which are just short and well produced and sort of showed some more expressive sides of shame and rage and some of the things we've been talking about. So I'd point people to those little videos on the, it's called resources blog part, right, as well.
Yeah, the resources, there's videos, there's blog posts there, and it gives you a really good sense of what I'm doing.
Great, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us today. If you're ever in the UK, let me know. And
I was just there.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.